And compassionate empathy is not just having that emotional connection of empathy or the emotional empathy portion of things, but doing something about the pain. So an example that I love to give is mentoring. Mentoring is all about compassionate empathy because it's not just having that emotional connection between the mentor and the mentee, but it is trying to understand where the pain is originating from or any kind of situation that the mentee is going through, and then collectively trying to work together to put action steps to improve upon that pain and reduce that pain. You should divorce the separation of personal and professional life. It's like almost you have to put a facade on when you are working in a place. That may have worked in the past, but we as humans have evolved so much. So while we have evolved, the expectation in some leaders is still the same, that you're not supposed to show emotions. And when you're living in such a kind of environment, and in some organizations, especially if it is toxic, showing weakness could be a liability because people are going, especially in political organizations or places that are toxic, people are going to take advantage of you if you're showing your emotions.
And during pandemic, I was working with CISCO on CISCO projects.
Okay.
And I realized the C staff, the C-suite and the CEO came out and started having more town halls during pandemic to address the concerns that the employees had and to showcase that here is what they are doing for the employees, and they were upfront about what was not in their control, right?
Yes.
We have such leaders who go beyond what is required. Hello and welcome to Mentorship Masterminds, the PMI podcast where we deep dive into the world of leadership, networking and professional development. I'm your host Mahesh Deshpande and I'm excited to bring another episode of Mentorship Masterminds. In each episode, I interview and talk to industry leaders or seasoned mentors who have carved a niche for themselves in the annals of leadership and innovation. I try to dig deep into their experiences, unravel the stories that have shaped them, and discover the strategies that have helped them succeed, and try to learn some nuggets from these masterminds. This podcast is being recorded at the vibrant Golden Gate University campus at the heart of downtown San Francisco, a city synonymous with pushing boundaries, breaking molds, and thinking differently. And that's exactly the spirit that fuels our podcast. In today's podcast, we are going to discuss about developing empathetic leadership. To talk to us about this topic, we have with us Dr. Gautham Pallapa. Gautham is an executive advisor at VMware who partners with Fortune 500 companies to help develop strategic roadmaps on various diverse initiatives. He is also founder of Transformity, an organization that focuses on developing solutions through technology and empathy. He is award-winning author of the book Leading with Empathy that has won a number of awards, and he is also a mentor with PMI San Francisco Bay Area Chapter's mentorship program. He is a friend and a mentor to me. Gautham, thank you for being on the show. Gautham, welcome to Mentorship Masterminds.
Thank you for having me, Mahesh. It's great to be here.
You are an author and advisor with the Fortune 500 companies. You wear multiple hats. You are a mentor, right? But our audience would like to know about your story, right? Tell us something that we don't find on your LinkedIn profile.
Sure. The first thing that I'd like to say to the audience is I first and foremost identify myself as a human. And by that I mean I try my level best to help humans in any way possible, and that's kind of the thing that drives me. It was the reason why I started Transformity. I want to help work with customers and executives and organizations and help them transform humans with empathy and with technology. It's not just technology. So a lot of this, the inspiration came from my mother. She was my role model, and I am everything because of her. She used to be head of the department in an Ivy League school in India, and she used to be one of the world leaders in HIV/AIDS. And she used to take me as a child and expose me to different sects of society and show how privileged I was, and that there are so many things to do. And she had a saying, which was, if you have not done something to improve human quality of life in some small way, then you've not really lived. And so that stuck on to me, and that's been my primary driver and my passion throughout. And that's why I've embraced empathic leadership. I have tried to move forward, move the needle, so to speak, and that was also kind of the reason, the predominant reason why I wrote the book, Leading with Empathy. It's to help share that. So that's something I'm sure people don't actually get on LinkedIn, but there it is.
That's a fascinating story. I read about your mother in the book, and it's a story of achievement as well as an inspirational story of going beyond the means, and I think I'm sure that has had an impact on you and your story. Yes. Thank you for sharing it.
Of course.
So, Gautham, this podcast is focused on our next generation leaders, developing next generation leaders who are trying to develop their leadership skills, who are trying to develop traits that would help them become better leaders.
Yeah.
Right? And with that in mind, this podcast topic is focused on empathetic leadership. How do we become empathetic leader, right? So, and there are multiple aspects, and we are going to peel all the layers, hopefully, in today's podcast. But let's start with empathy, right?
Yeah.
How do we define empathy? What does it mean in context of leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question, because empathy is actually an umbrella word. It can mean so many things for so many people. So let's start there. At a very, very high level, empathy is love and understanding for humans. That's the most basic fundamental thing. It means that you are trying to do things to relate to humans, and you're also trying to do things to help humans in particular ways. I do want to preface and say that sometimes people confuse sympathy and empathy.
Yeah.
There is a difference there, and maybe we can go down that route a little later. But from an executive standpoint, what I would say is empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, view things from their point of view, and try to understand why they performed an action, what is impacting them, and if there are ways that you can do to help them together. That's what true empathy is. And that's where I tend to align with as well. So my definition, my guiding principle for empathy is, if I can look at someone else's pain and I can feel it, I can put myself in their shoes and understand it. And it's not just understanding and get that emotional relationship, but I do something to improve or reduce that pain. That's when I feel that I'm actually being empathic. And that's what leadership is all about. If you think about it, leadership is not just having people report up through you in a HR system, or you build your fiefdoms or silos, whatever metaphor you want to use for that. It is about being there for people and helping remove their impediments and reducing any kind of manual friction or toil or pain that they're going through, and removing those impediments. That's when you truly become a leader. And that's why, while people call it agile leadership, in reality it is servant leadership, and in my mind it's no different things. You cannot be a leader by just managing people. Like, you need people to be walking with you and be committed with your cause and with your purpose. And the only way you can do it is if you build that trust and respect and create that psychological safe environments for people to thrive, and that's when you become a leader. That's why empathy is so important to me. It is one of the core tenets of leadership in my mind.
Okay. I would like to spend a minute on what you just said. It's not just about putting yourself in your team members or your team members' shoes, but also taking some action about it.
Yes.
Right? So can you elaborate more on that?
So I'll go back to the fact that empathy is a very broad umbrella term. There are actually three main kinds of empathy.
Okay.
The first one is cognitive empathy. And this is where people put themselves into other people's shoes, and they try to understand what's going on. So someone who's a sales executive, or maybe a negotiator, puts themselves into the other person's shoes, and there is no emotional relationship. This is more of a very rational, calculated approach, and that is cognitive empathy. The second one, and this is where people actually think of when they use the word empathy, is emotional empathy. And emotional empathy is where you have that emotional connection between people, and you feel what the other person feels. That's emotional empathy. I would say strong team leadership, like especially in close-knit, high-performing teams, those leaders will experience emotional empathy because they are really connected and they are able to sense and feel upon one another. But it can be extremely draining because you always have to be on. Taking in emotions takes a toll on anyone.
Yeah.
The third one, and this is where I gravitate more towards, is compassionate empathy. And compassionate empathy is not just having that emotional connection of empathy, or the emotional empathy portion of things, but doing something about the pain. So an example that I love to give is mentoring. Mentoring is all about compassionate empathy because it's not just having that emotional connection between the mentor and the mentee, but it is trying to understand where the pain is originating from or any kind of situation that the mentee is going through, and then collectively trying to work together to put action steps to improve upon that pain and reduce that pain. And that's compassionate empathy. And that's why I say when you have to be a leader or when you're a mentor, and this is where I really enjoy being a mentor, especially with the PMI folks, is I like to help, and I like to help reduce the pain. And more often than not, the way that I do it is actually share my failures and my stories and say, hey, I tried it, it blew up in my face, and you probably shouldn't do it, and here's why. But that is, again, trying to give actionable steps to help people. And that's why compassionate empathy, I believe, is the best way to show empathy if you're a leader.
You talk about also you being vulnerable,
Yeah.
where you talk about where you have made mistakes and you don't want that to, you want to share that, right? That is also sometimes considered as a weakness.
Yes.
When it comes to leadership. So how does, can you put that in context?
Yeah. Okay, so for whatever reason, and this is probably coming because we've looked as leaders as more militaristic in the past, like entire history, it's more about military leaders and you follow that particular regime, right? So when you're in the military or when you're a militaristic leader or you're driving value from that, you tend not to show your emotions. You tend to be very stoic. And I've heard things like emotions should never live in a workplace. You should divorce the separation of personal and professional life. It's like almost you have to put a facade on when you are working in a place. That may have worked in the past, but we as humans have evolved so much. So while we have evolved, the expectation in some leaders is still the same, that you're not supposed to show emotions. And when you're living in such a kind of environment, and in some organizations, especially if it is toxic, showing weakness could be a liability. Because people are going, especially in political organizations or places that are toxic, people are going to take advantage of you if you're showing your emotions. And that's why people hesitate to wear the heart on their sleeve or to be vulnerable, because that's a sign of weakness. And what happens through evolution? Anyone who has shown signs of weaknesses is attacked and probably eliminated, and then the next alpha male comes in, or the alpha person now comes in, right? That's evolutionary.
Correct.
And it's really hard now because we are expected to be vulnerable or to put our heart on our sleeve, but we have all these challenges. So what I would say is there is a difference between wearing your heart on your sleeve and being extremely open and candid as a leader versus being vulnerable but with boundaries. I think that the boundary aspect of things is where some people might miss it. So for example, as a leader, especially when you're a CEO, a CIO, a VP of an entire organization, or you're the head of a department or a business unit, you will have to take decisions that could or could not impact some of the people on your teams. So while you can be empathic, at the same time, you can't be extremely candid and share these things. If you're going through a merger or an acquisition, for example, there are really hard decisions that have to be made as a leader. And you are in that role because you have to make that decision. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be empathic in those places, but what I'm saying is you cannot wear your heart on your sleeve and walk around in the hallways. That just impacts the morale of the entire organization, and you're failing as a leader at that point. So you want to be vulnerable, you want to be kind, you want to approach things with empathy, but at the same time, you need to have boundaries and not share everything with everyone everywhere. There is no cookie cutter approach for this, and everyone's mileage is going to vary. It all depends upon the culture of the organization. It depends upon how bureaucratic or pathological the organization is, and how open they are. But that you will need to adjust and learn, and this is where people are going to fail a lot. But it's okay. You will learn from your failures and tweak it.
Thank you for clarifying that. Your example reminded me of the CISCO CEO. So you are an advisor with Fortune 500 clients. I'm a tech consultant. I work with high-tech clients. And during pandemic, I was working with Cisco on Cisco projects.
Okay.
And I realized the C-staff, the C-suite and the CEO came out and started having more town halls during pandemic to address the concerns that the employees had and to showcase that here is what they are doing for the employees. And most of the employees had a question on when we are going back to office. So they were clear on few things that they knew they had under their control, and they were upfront about what was not in their control, right?
Yes.
And even in case of when the George Floyd incident happened, right? CEO comes out, has a town hall and expresses that he is, impacted by this, right?
Yeah.
And he is there to support team members who are going through pain. I think when you were talking about leadership and empathy, that incident reminded me that we have such leaders who go beyond what is required and communicate and express even their vulnerability at times. But as you called out, probably when there are acquisitions, that may not be the right time to show vulnerability, right? So what you're trying to say is also it's situational and you need to evolve, and there is no cookie cutter method for this.
That is correct. You are exactly right. And I would say it is not just to be vulnerable, but to be authentic when you're vulnerable. So when many CEOs came out and talked about it during either the BLM riots or during the pandemic, the initial portions, most of the town halls and so on, a lot of them who were successful were actually genuine and authentic. You cannot be vulnerable or you cannot fake vulnerability because your authenticity will come in the way. You can only do so much. So you want to be authentic and you want to be vulnerable, but within limits, within boundaries.
That's a great point. I think people see through it when you're just doing it for the sake of doing it. Makes sense. So Gautham, if empathetic leadership is this important, why do we have such a dearth of leaders who show this empathetic leadership, right? I gave an example where I have encountered a leader who has shown empathy, but we know in corporate culture whether it's all about either move up or move out, right? Which a philosophy which many companies follow, especially in the Bay Area or in tech sector where you see this most. How does empathetic leadership in that context play a role, right? If I'm a leader, if I'm working in the tech sector in a cutthroat environment, right? And how do I still maintain my authenticity and my empathetic leadership?
Yeah, it is a challenge. And we touched upon one of them, right? We touched upon the fact that empathic leadership or leadership overall has emerged with a militaristic view to start with. So that's one of the things we already talked about it. That's one of the primary reasons why we do have a dearth of empathic leadership in the workforce. It's a weakness. according to people,
Okay.
especially in political or toxic environments. The next thing is empathy takes a toll on people, right? When you have to feel the emotions of other humans and when you have to understand it and do something about it, it takes a toll upon you. It drains your energy because you always have to be on. Now, some leaders could be introverted, and when they are introverted, it's going to be even more harder for them because they have to take in that energy and then expand and share it with the world. So that's another thing. And especially if you're in the tech sector, most of us were introverted when we grew up, right? And then we started realizing that we have to expand our energies, and we converted into being ambiverted and then afterwards become extroverted at times. And that's how it actually happens. And so it does take a lot of energy. And so some people cannot, they get drained, and it's really hard for them to be that empathic or being an empathic leader. So that's the second thing. The third thing I would say is empathic leadership requires you to think about other people.
Yeah.
Now, when you've climbed up a corporate ladder really quickly, for example, in a toxic environment, you did that at the expense of other people. In many cases, in a toxic environment. So, and that's how the world works. It is a fight mechanism, right? It is, you have to climb up the ladder, which means some people will not be able to climb up the ladder. It's not a participation trophy kind of a thing. People will step on others, and that's life, unfortunately, and that's what happens. So empathic leadership expects that you focus on other people. But the people who might have climbed up the ladder might have been type A personalities who focused on themselves and were self-serving or tried to look inwards. And that's at conflicts with each other. They're orthogonal concepts, and so it's hard to bring that empathic leadership. That's the third point that I would make. The fourth one, and this is where I think we can still reshape organizations, is organizations sometimes award the wrong things. Like the KPI, the key performance indicators, or the objectives and key results, or the MBOs, you name it, they probably are motivating people to be more performance driven than people driven. And at which point empathic leadership really takes a back burner, because if you're not performing, if you're not providing profit, or if you're not meeting your expectations, you probably won't exist as a leader very quickly. So that's another thing. Like, organizations focus on metrics and measuring value is going to depict or drive the behavior within an organization. So if you're very P&L focused, probably empathic leadership is not going to exist a lot. So these are the four things that I would say are really predominant and causing the dearth of empathic leadership in companies.
And in your experience, are you seeing companies changing their structure, their organization to focus on this aspect?
Yes, they are, and that's the exciting part about it. And this is something that I love doing on a day-to-day basis, and that's why I actually do enjoy my job. As an executive advisor, I am focusing on helping people work on their value and trying to improve their value, because the focus has to be on experiences and value and not just upon the revenue that is being generated. There are so many other things there. So I have seen organizations switching and improving and focusing on value rather than on just the P&L. So there's a lot of exciting stuff that's going to happen, and pretty soon I am confident that we will start putting frameworks together that will actually align towards it.
That's positive. So if I'm an empathetic leader, right, we have, especially in the tech sector, as well as these days in any industry that you can think of, we have people from different cultures, different backgrounds, and we have also different leadership styles. We have authoritative or some who are delegative. We also have servant leadership model, which you touched upon. Do these play a role in shaping your perspective towards empathetic leadership?
That is an interesting question. Let me start off by saying this. First of all, I would say that anyone does not need to have a title or permission to be an empathic leader.
Okay.
It is their actions to improve human quality of life that makes them an empathic leader. And we saw that throughout the pandemic. People were not having titles. They stepped in and they did the job. They tried to improve human quality of life. Everyone became a leader at that point. So I firmly would encourage everyone to consider the fact that you don't need to have permission or a title to be a leader. Anyone can do that. Now, having said that, there are certain things that we do want to take into consideration when we are looking at things from a cultural aspect or from a background aspect, from a diversity aspect. Each person has their unique experiences and they have their unique traits. What I would like people, especially who are emerging leaders or in their nascency, to do is take a step back, evaluate their personal experiences, and see why it is not a leadership moment. So the way, I'll give you an example. And I'm probably going to talk about my child. He's now 9 years old. He was 6 when I wrote the book, 7. He really wants to do things in order to improve the world. So he's all about green, opposing fracking, like conservation, those kind of things. So in school, one of the things that he saw was there was a really short time during recess, and people were not having time to pick up their plates or pick up the trash and put it back. Mm-hmm. And that was impacting the janitor. So he created this thing, and I'm really proud of it. Like, he did a petition, and he created this thing, and he called it a littermity, which is a litter committee.
Okay.
And it was a portmanteau of that. So he called it littermity, and he went around to each class canvassing and saying, hey, we need people on this littermity to help during recess and rotate it. And so he created the littermity because he saw pain, and he saw a way to reduce the pain. That had nothing to do with leadership. That had nothing to do with any of the other frameworks or business processes or all these things. It was a human moment. He wanted to reduce the pain. And so the reason why I'm telling this story is, if you take a step back, what my son was doing was actually demonstrating empathic leadership. But the way he was doing it was different. So this is my theory. When you take a step back and evaluate your cultural, your background, your diversity, your experiences, think about the things that you have done that have reduced pain for people. That is the fundamental anchor. And then see if you can or if you have found like-minded people to do it. Because if you've identified a pain, and now I'm going to put it into a corporate context, so anything that we do in an industry is probably to reduce pain for someone, be it intrinsic, be it extrinsic, be it customer features, you are introducing new software, automating something. It's all about reducing pain.
Right.
So you start with the place of reducing pain, which is a very empathic place. Then look at identifying the like-minded people out there who are going to reduce that pain. That becomes your team. And now you are leading that team because it is your purpose, and they are motivated to help reduce it. And when they reduce that pain, they will start generating the value. And when they generate that value, they have a purpose now. And because they're reducing the value of the pain that other people are doing, and they're seeing the fruits of their results, they get motivation. And that is, in essence, empathic leadership. That is how you generate that flywheel. So take any episode in your life, any event in your life, take a step back, put a different lens on it, and see if you're reducing pain. I guarantee you that every one of us has done it in some way, shape, or form.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And kudos to your son for taking that initiative. I think, so what you're trying to say is, you don't have to be a leader. You start practicing empathy, you end up becoming a leader.
Yes.
Right? And you start mingling and working, create your own team of like-minded professionals, and it's good that you're doing it and you're spreading good around the world, right?
Yes.
And you end up becoming a leader by practicing more and more.
Yes.
Which is great. I think our next gen leaders who are the audience for this podcast would be, can surely relate to that, because not everyone has titles, as you
Yeah.
called out, and just focusing on doing good, being empathetic, and irrespective of what culture people come from. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I would like to switch gears here.
Sure.
And talk about some of the strategies, right? So our next gen leaders are convinced that empathetic leadership is something that will get them somewhere, will help them in their career, or even if it doesn't, it's good for them to become a leader, to develop, to become a better version of themselves. What are some of the strategies or techniques, if you can talk about those, on what are some of the do's and don'ts in helping our next gen leaders focus on becoming empathetic leaders?
Okay. So there are 2 points that are 2 directions that you are asking me to talk about. The first one is personally, how to be a better empathic leader and grow. So that's one thing. And the other thing, as a result of that, we also do want to talk about what are the tools that are required to create and nurture an empathic culture. Because it's not enough that you're an empathic leader. I mean, that's fine. But unless you create a positive culture and a culture that is generative, it is really hard to sustain it.
Absolutely.
So there are 2 things, and I'll try to address that as much as possible. So from a personal or from an empathic leadership perspective, there are so many ways and there are so many books, but I'll distill it down to 6 things that I firmly believe are necessary. We touched upon 2 of them, but the first one is to be authentic. You cannot be an empathic leader if you're not authentic. That is just the way it is. And people can really find it, and then they will not be able to build that trust and respect. So the first one is to be authentic.
Okay.
That means that your say-to-do ratio, that's what I call it, the say-to-do ratio needs to be as close to 1 as possible, which means if you say you're going to do something, you are going to do it or follow up with it. Because if you don't, trust and respect doesn't get built. So that's the first one. It's going to be hard, so be very mindful about what you are committing to doing. But that doesn't mean don't commit at all, which defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have people to walk, to follow you along the journey, all you're doing is just taking a walk. That's all you're doing. So you really want to have people following and be committed to the cause. The second thing is to be vulnerable. We talked about that, but vulnerable with boundaries. That's the second thing that I would say. The third thing is to be approachable.
Okay.
You want to, as a leader, you want people to come to you. And this is something that I actually missed a lot during COVID when everything was remote. Like I love to do Gemba walks or management by walking around. And there I used to meet people, I used to understand things, I used to walk through the entire halls. It's super healthy, you get your steps in, so that's a positive. But second, you get to meet people and you get to meet their stories and understand and learn.
Absolutely.
You see them as people now, not as email addresses, not as Slack handles or Teams handles, whatever, or employee IDs. You see them as people.
Yeah, I think that's the the greatest downfall of the pandemic of working remotely.
Yes.
We don't have those people to people interaction.
I know, I do. But luckily, we have, especially being in the Silicon Valley, we have responded in Silicon Valley fashion by bringing some applications that actually do it. Yeah. So if you're on Slack, for example, you have Donut or you have Hallway, which simulate this digital experience of the physical world. So you could do that. But the whole thing is you have to meet people.
Right.
You have to be open enough that your door, it's not just that your door is open, but people should want to come there. So that's the third one, that is to be approachable. The fourth thing that I would say is it's not just when they approach you that they're able to approach you, but you have to be attentive. People, when someone comes to you with a problem or comes to you to talk about things, you need to acknowledge that they're being extremely courageous at that moment. They're overcoming their fears and all their trepidation and anxieties and coming to talk to you about something. Be respectful about that. We give 100% attention and active listening. And I have seen so many leaders, and I've had experiences as well where I've seen people come in, they're talking, and then they're easily multitasking. They're like probably typing an email or checking something or doing something on the phone. Like, that's very disrespectful. Let's not do that. To be extremely attentive. The next thing is to be appreciative. That is something that is a cultural problem at times. Like, we come from India. It is not known to actually show your appreciation in public.
Yeah.
The closest appreciation one may get is, rather than saying you did a good job, usually you say, oh, you didn't totally suck. That is something that we should get over, and that's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And we need to be appreciative about that.
Yeah.
But again, if there are things, if there are feedbacks that we want to give it in private. We never want to give it in public. And as a leader, we need to make sure that we do not have outbursts. That is beneath us. And then finally, be connected. You have to connect to people, and it's going to be hard. Like, especially if you're introverted, it's going to be hard. But you don't have to do it as a big bang. You're not going to start off your leadership role with, say, 2,000 people reporting up through you, or interacting with tens of teams. You're going to start small, and that's okay. I mean, I was a developer. I grew up through the ranks. I was very introverted, and it took small steps for me to finally reach this place where I have led really large teams. But it all starts with 2 or 3 people. Like, team lead is your first step.
Yeah.
So start small. You don't have to be anxious about the big thing. So that's the personal side. 6 things, very simple. From an organizational standpoint, especially when you're building a culture of empathy, apart from the fact that you have to be empathic and create that psychologically safe environment, you have a couple of other things, and I call this the 5 E's framework. So the first E is empathize.
5 E's.
5 E's.
Okay.
Yes. So the first E is empathize. So you have to be an empathic leader. You have to create a area of psychological safety. The next thing is you want to empower. You want to enable people and make sure that they're able to feel empowered enough to actually make decisions, be it a product-centric role or a service-centric role. You want to empower them. Next, you want to engage. You want to have open communication. You want to have transparency. You want to have candor. And you want to have discussions without a facade. Again, being respectful, but still, you want to engage and have that open communication. Then you have to entrust. It's not enough that you empower people, but if you're continuously second-guessing how they're doing things, you're not empowering them or entrusting them. You're actually debilitating it.
What's the difference?
So empowering is giving people the power and the ability to go do something. Okay. And they say, okay, cool. We give you all the power to go and do and solve this particular problem. So we will tell you why it needs to be done or what needs to be done. You go do the how. But then I have seen some leaders who, when they see this, when they get the solution back, they're like, no, we don't want this solution. This is not how it should be done. I expect you to do it this way. So if you're telling them how you're doing it, you're not entrusting them to do it. Because no one's going to go off, and especially if you're given the proper guardrails. They're not going to go off and say, oh, we're going to make all these whiz-bangy things which are completely irrational. They would be working within the confines of the organization. So we need to learn to entrust.
Don't be a micromanager.
Yes, do not be a micromanager. I learned that the hard way. And this is especially for people who grow up within the ranks. It is really hard to let go of your technical chops and your urge to roll up your sleeves and jump in. You need to learn to delegate. You need to learn to let go. It is not a weakness on your part. It is not about losing control. It's about elevating your teams and empowering them and entrusting them. So I'm just telling you that's important.
Yeah, I can totally relate to it. I'm also learning this the hard way. I have experiences where I was told categorically by my manager that when I became the first manager during my earlier career days in India, I didn't know about what micromanaging is as well. So I learned it the hard way. So I can totally relate to what you're saying about entrusting and versus empowering. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
What's the last?
The last one is to equip.
Equip.
You have to give people the right tools to be successful. And these are all the things that are necessary to create. I call it the 5 E's. So it's empathize, empower, engage, entrust, and equip. So if you do this, you are definitely going to nurture an empathic culture.
Awesome. So for organization level, follow the 5 E's, and at an individual level, be authentic, be approachable, be attentive, vulnerable, and connected.
And yeah,
awesome. These are golden nuggets. All right. The next question is about, on the same lines, I want to discuss about working in a virtual environment. Post-pandemic, we all have been working in virtual environment, and it is hard for anyone, especially leaders, to connect with their teams as well as show empathy, right? Situations where, like we discussed about those conversations in the hallways, right? We have apps, and there are app tools that are made online to simulate the same experience, but it's still not the same. We have meetings to discuss a particular topic, and then we are done, right? We have to really put efforts to build that connection with our team. So what are your views on how leaders can develop empathetic relation or focus on developing their empathetic leadership style in a virtual environment?
It's interesting times for sure that we're living in, and I think this is where I get super excited because every one of us are trying to learn. There is no repeatable process, there's no cookie cutter approach, there's no actual solution. It all depends on the organization, it depends upon the culture, it depends upon the people, and it also depends upon the leader.
Okay.
Some things that I would say is be extremely mindful of the fact that every time you want to have an interaction, you could potentially be adding an additional meeting on the calendar with someone. We already have too many meetings, and you know me, I go off on rants about meetings and meetings actually being conducted like support forums rather than actually getting outcomes out of it. But be mindful of that. Try to have more skip level meetings if possible, because you want to make sure that everywhere up the chain that there is connectivity and there are people that are talking. Try to find low friction ways to have much more team meetings. Like one of the things that I found amusing during the pandemic is we all used to have virtual happy hour. Every Friday or Thursday or whenever it was, we used to have a virtual happy hour. When you have a recurring meeting, which is the virtual happy hour, what you're doing, you're mandating fun. You're demanding that someone actually show up and be there, because put yourself in the shoes of an organization that is probably pathological or a bureaucratic organization, right? It's political. So if you don't appear, you are sending a message out there that you are not conforming, you're not part of the team. That was annoying to me in a number of ways. A, because it was a regular scheduled meeting to have fun. B, because now you're mandated to actually be there. And C, what about the people who don't drink? It's a happy hour.
Yeah.
What about them? Like, you're being disrespectful to people. You're not accommodating enough. So then we tried this thing, which is a lean coffee.
Okay.
Which is much better, like, okay, people have coffee. You can bring your own beverage and drink and talk about all this. But we tried different versions of it. What I found amazing was that we rotate the people who are going to drive these kinds of things, and then we crowdsource the topics that want to be talked. And usually the topics that have to be talked must, and this is important, they must not be about work. Because if you are going to talk about work, you know what you've made it? You made it a status meeting or a project meeting. Nothing different from any of the other meetings we have. So we want to put some of those guardrails out there. We want to bring those kinds of things. Be spontaneous, like reach out. Depending upon where you are, there might be people who are close to you. Just have a regular meeting, go bowling, do stuff. I don't have that. Like, I am in an extremely distributed team, so I don't think I have anyone close to me here. So if I have to go meet people physically, I have to jump on a plane. My teammates, that is, so I have to go on a plane. But when we do meet, we have a lot of fun. We work on all these things, and I am actually very lucky and privileged again that I'm working on a highly performant team. Like, we are extremely connected because we are sharing the common scars of failures as leaders. So we connected on that. But there are ways, we are still exploring it. It's hard to say definitively that this is the 1, 2, or 3 things that you have to do, but just experiment. Just keep trying. It'll fail. You'll fail a number of times. But you know what? You tried.
Yeah.
And you had good intentions. And that's important.
Yeah, makes sense. I think for me, the challenge has been people don't show up.
Yeah.
Because they have so many meetings in their calendar all day, and this is like, even if it's virtual fun,
yeah,
it's like it's another meeting,
yeah,
right? So I like the idea of mandated probably sessions, as well as not call them happy hours, reframe them and call them something else, meet or coffee or something, and keep a regular cadence. I think that's a great idea.
So let me say another thing though, because what you said actually triggered something into me. Every organization, especially during the pandemic, we've started going on digital transformation journeys. So what that translates at the operational level means you have much more work to do. Like you have your day job, and then you have digital transformation initiatives that you have to work on. We have the tyranny of the backlog. So if we are going to expect people to actually join in and do these kinds of things, what have we done to reduce their backlog? Like, have we actually eliminated some meetings to accommodate for this? So that was something that we did, and I think I write about it in the book. It's called Project Athena, where our goal was actually to improve the work-life balance of people. And we started looking at annoying things that people used to do just before they used to go home, and our goal was to make sure that they went home and spent more time with their family by automating those things. That was what we started off with, and we saved a lot of time, and pretty soon we were having fun. We did amazing things, like we had to decommission some of the servers in a data center, and so we decommissioned it, and then we took all those pizza boxes out, we cut holes in them, we made a par 4 golf course within a conference room and played golf. Like, imagine, that's amazing fun. Then another time we all went, it was a team event, we took some of these servers, we put tannerite and blew it up, and we celebrated it.
Sounds fun.
It was amazing fun. So think differently. I think this is a good opportunity for us to rethink and reimagine how we approach these things. Put a much more humanistic view of life, because at the end of the day, we are all going to work for long hours together. We might as well have some fun doing it.
Makes sense. Totally. Speaking of digital transformation and technology, these days everyone is talking about artificial intelligence, right? Generative AI is the buzzword. Everyone wants to be associated doing something related to generative AI or showcasing some certification which says that they know something about generative AI. My question to you is, how do you see the technological shifts as well as artificial intelligence, the role that is going to play in shaping leadership, as well as in context of empathetic leadership? Where does technology, artificial intelligence, how does that play a role? I'm trying to, I know
it's a great question.
Futuristic question, but what's your take on it?
So I am, the reason why I probably have paused is because I want to formulate this without using the maximum number of buzzwords that are currently used in the market. Okay, so here's my take on it. I firmly believe that it is people who are going to be the true value creators. It is never technology, whatever technology it is. Technology can only be an enabler or an accelerator to the value that we want to derive. So it always has to be a symbiotic relationship, or much more a supplemental relationship, like it is a this and that. You cannot approach technology with the thought that you will replace humans. That is not the way to do it, which unfortunately some organizations are looking at. I would say there is immense power in using things like large language models and AI and machine learning and all these things, because it helps predict things before they could, before they become critical. So we are becoming more proactive and prescriptive and predictive rather than reactive. So there's a lot of benefit there.
Of course.
The other thing is, most of these technologies They are learning from a very small slice of human history. If you take your LLMs, which is the hotness right now, it is all learning from a very small section of Western civilization, which is even no more than a couple of decades back. So we are taking a tiny, tiny bit of human civilization and thinking that we can create and we can extrapolate and then start making amazing things come out of it. No. Just imagine the amount of biases that we are going to get out of it. Like most of these don't take into consideration non-English or non-Western texts. And they have to be digitized for this to consume and to learn. So consider those things when you're trying to implement it, that the sheer amount of biases that are going to get introduced into these systems. That's one thing that I would caution about. So be careful about it.
Okay.
The other thing is, I think the excitement is because you give these technologies a prompt and it automatically spits out a lot of stuff. And so you think you can supplement or you can let go of other things, but all it's doing is selective regurgitation of things that are happening with a creative spin. That's pretty much it. We want to use it for maybe supplementing the creative ideas and the thoughts that we have, but not completely take it over. Like I would personally, this is me as a person, as a human, I would never allow a system to start creating ideas for me. I would create the ideas and I would ask for information to supplement it. So that's how I would use it. And I would say the same thing is with it. There are huge benefits. Like I worked in the healthcare industry and there are immense benefits for me, especially from recognizing patterns, predictive algorithms, trying to bring in the learning models so that it can support and assist the healthcare professionals, reduce the wait time for patients, improve the quality of life. That is huge. I fully support and embrace that. Would I make it a doctor? No, probably not. I would not. So I think we still need humans in the mix. That's where that is going to be there for a very long time. But that doesn't mean we have to abandon the technology. We want to use it. And this is where it becomes interesting. Like a system cannot understand empathy. It just cannot, right? It is a human emotion. So while we can code it for empathy, all we're doing is coding our biases for empathy to the system.
You won't have that authenticity part.
It will not be there.
Right.
It cannot be genuine. And it cannot be really vulnerable because it's open. It's always open, right? So I firmly believe that we need to start with empathic leadership, but not disregard the tools, but utilize them in the right way. Understanding that these are systemic tools that are created for more deterministic systems, not non-realistic, non-deterministic beings like us, or irrational beings also. So that's my take, without using most of the buzzwords that we use today.
Thank you for sharing that. So my last question to you for today's podcast is, we have our next generation leaders who are watching this podcast trying to develop empathetic leadership. What are the final 3 to 5 key takeaways that you think that they should leave with from this podcast?
Sure. All right. The first thing I would say is you don't need a title or permission to be an empathic leader. It's your actions to improve human quality of life that actually make you an empathic leader. That's the first thing. In order to be an empathic leader, you want to be
authentic.
Yes.
Vulnerable.
Yes.
Approachable.
Yes.
Attentive.
Yes.
What was the last one? Engaged.
Appreciative and connected.
And connected.
There you go. Good job. You got 4 out of 6.
I was attentive.
Yeah, so you want to be those 6 things. That is really simple, and it's easy to be that. You want to do it. The third thing I would say is lean experimentation is your way to go. The world is changing so much. It's hyper-dynamic right now. It is really important for us to make small experiments, lean experiments, and fail often, fast, and cheap. Because failure of one person or a team is validated learning for an entire organization. So seize that, celebrate failures. I have made a life out of celebrating failures, and I can tell you so many stories about the wonderful ways we celebrated failures. So that is something. And then finally, I think I would end with my mother's quote, which is, if you have not done something to improve a human's life in some small way, you have not really lived.
That's powerful. Thank you, Gautham.
Thank you for having me.
For our audience, this was just a teaser in the podcast. We have Gautham's book, Leading with Empathy, which has more nuggets, which will tell you more about understanding the needs of today's workforce, as well as how to develop your empathetic leadership skills. Thank you, Gautham. Thank you once again.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's been a blast.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Mentorship Masterminds. I hope this episode provided you with some valuable nuggets, insights, and helped you move an inch closer to becoming a better version of yourself. If you like our podcast, please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and keep listening to Mentorship Masterminds with me, your host, Mahesh Deshpande. Until next time, keep thriving, keep inspiring.